hear me? Okay.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
Nope, they're all on. Can you hear me now? This isn't a panto, but I make it bigger. Can you hear me now? Well, thank you very much for coming today. This is a big moment for Lavender Menace because some of you will remember 2 years ago when we introduced Kate Charlesworth's cards. There were, in the end, 12 cards for queer writers, and we were amazed that we couldn't believe this was really us helping to create these brilliant images. And now, 2 years later, we're back with a new set of cards from Kate, but it's all different. Everything has changed. Everything has changed in the archive, and the cards are, as you're going to see soon, very different as well. Bob is just going to say a few words about the changes that we've had in the archive, which have surprised even us.
Hello there. My name's Bob Orr. I'm the co-founder with Sigrid of Lavender Menace Queer Books Archive. 4 years ago, the archive was just a twinkle in our eyes, as they say. And we've come along such a long way in that time. Even 2 years ago, almost to the day when we were here launching Kate's cards, we were still homeless. But now we have our own premises. We're in St. Margaret's House at the east end of London Road towards Portobello. We have a fantastic team of volunteers. We've got up to 12 active volunteers and more that come and go, who are just without doubt indefatigable in their dedication and their loyalty to the archive. I'm really full of admiration for them. The most important thing that we've been doing since we opened the premises and got all the books that we were collecting out of boxes and onto shelves was to collate a digital catalogue. This has been an ongoing project since June 2022, and we are now ready to launch it online for people to be able to peruse over 2,100 titles at the moment, and that's growing day by day. Thank you. We're launching the catalogue on the 25th of November, so keep an eye out on social media for the link and have a look through this amazing collection. All of this has really been as a result of a 3-year funding support from the National Lottery Heritage Fund since last March, and a little tranche of money from Awards for All, which is helping us through as well. So thanks to them as well, we have a project coordinator that works part-time with us. She is also indefatigable. Why did I choose that word?
Because you knew you couldn't say it.
Yeah,
you wanted to
that must
practice.
be it, yeah. And she's full of ideas and just great. So thank you to the lottery, and thank you to lottery players as well for their contributions.
Well, if you weren't here 2 years ago, you won't perhaps have seen Kate's cards. I'll tell you just a little bit about them. Kate has had a very long career as a cartoonist and writer. Her cartoons have appeared in Gay News and the pink paper. You have to be pretty old to remember Gay News, but it was everywhere in those days. And that's among many others. And she's the author of Sensible Footwear, a girl's guide, which is a history of the past 50 years of both UK LGBTQ plus history woven into her own autobiography. And the cards that she did for us, there were 12 cards in the colors of the Progressive Pride flag. They included images of Audre Lorde, Oscar Wilde, Jan Morris, E.M. Forster, Nancy Spain, Vita Sackville West, and Iona McGregor and Hamish Henderson from here in Scotland. And Kate has now embarked on a new project. These are portraits of living queer writers. We're thrilled to see the portraits because our archive is here to connect the writers of the past in the books we collect, which are mostly from 1970 to 2000, to the queer books of today. And we've kept the images of Kate's new cards a complete secret. No one's seen them except the volunteers, and some of the volunteers saw them just this morning. But the moment has come to reveal Kate's new creations. I don't know if you can contain your excitement. Please try to maintain some order. But here they are. And number 1, Alan Cumming. And can you say a bit about why you chose Alan?
Well, can you hear me? Great. Well, I chose Alan. First, let me say, they're all living writers. They're actually all Scottish writers, except for one, authors. And that's not entirely luck, but it's not entirely judgment either. We're very rich in Scotland in our creative people. And Alan Cumming is such a vibrant person. I mean, there's nothing he'll not tackle. Dance, cabaret. He actually owns a cabaret club in New York, film, theatre, and when he does something, I think he really comes out for it. I mean, he had an award from PETA, P-E-T-A, because he's a vegan and he's very forthright for animal rights, for queer rights, and he was a natural, and he's so perky. That image is quite a good one. I work from photographs, and that image, really by accident, is a perkier mirror of the one behind him, where he's posing for the memoir of his book, which is a lot about his relationship with his father, which was a terrible one. It's a very moving book, and very harrowing in places. And he is such an astonishing man to have survived that awful childhood. Yeah, and he's bisexual. He was married for some years and had significant relationships with women. But I think I have it here, in 2007, I think he civil partnered his then lover, Grant Schaffer, and he has dual American-British citizenship now, and I think they live in the Catskills or somewhere exciting and expensive. And he's an interesting guy.
Okay, well, number 2, Val McDermott.
Well, okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, well, I was going to say Val needs no introduction, but this is an introduction. And, I mean, she's a proud Scot, a feminist, radical feminist also, some would say, utterly queer champion, intersectional, brilliant person. And she's part of the Tartan Noir style of school of Scottish crime writing. She's also the first working class woman, i.e. somebody who came from a Scottish state school, who studied at St Hilda's in Oxford and took her degree there, I think a year or two before anybody else. She was in the same tranche as Gordon Brown, who was deemed to be an exceptionally bright student. And so that's where she started off from. And her work is, the first book she wrote were the Lindsay Gordon novels. And Lindsay Gordon was the first lesbian detective character in British publishing history. Then she went on to Kate Brannigan novels. And then, as she said, I asked her which book she would, out of her back catalogue, which book she'd like me to draw her with. And she chose, I don't know how well you can see that, but she chose The Mermaid Singing. And I've tried to use first editions where I can, which is what I always do with these books. And she said that was her breakthrough novel. She considered that her breakthrough novel, where very dark, where the Wire in the Blood season, I think, on television was based on the. I said to her, "I'm sorry, Val, I know her slightly," and I said, "I'm really sorry. I have to say this now. They're too much for me. I can't read them. I'm too frightened." And she said, "Read Karen Pirie. You'll like them." And I do. They're fantastic. And that's the fourth strand of work she does. And the next strand that she's working on is the Ali Burns saga. And that, she says, is the nearest she will ever get to an autobiography, because it starts in 79, 89's come out, the next one is 99, and so on. And I think we'll end in 2019, I think that last one will be. But they're all in the future. She's also she was a dyed-in-the-wool Wraith Rovers fan. She's from Kirkcaldy over in Fife, and they were her team. When Wraith Rovers signed, they named racist, legally named racist, what am I saying? Rapist. David Good Willie, was an unfortunately named man. She'd been a very big supporter, big donator to the team, and they kept him. There was a huge outcry. It wasn't just her; it was a huge outcry from male fans as well. They kept him on, so she resigned as a sponsor. The women's team resigned as well, and she sponsors them, and they decided they didn't want to be called Wraith Women's Team or whatever. They took a poll amongst themselves, and they're now called McDermott's Ladies. That's what they chose, and that's who they are. So a partner, Joe Sharp, Professor Joe Sharp, is coincidentally, she was appointed the King's Royal Scottish Geographer, which there was much fun to be had about that. It was a recently revived title, and I think it's because she is a professor of geography, and the geographer will promote Scotland in interesting ways. I think that's an extraordinary combination. I don't think Val's going to be the King's Royal murder story writer, but who knows. Could I also say at this point, and this applies to all these cards, that the last cards, the 12 preceding cards, have all been about dead people. And these are all live writers, and it was, I'm very pleased to say that everybody was delighted to be included, but I had to ask them. Tracking some of them down was more difficult than others. And maybe we'll talk about that a little later on, about the interesting differences between the living and the dead. Very joyous that people are the living, obviously. So yeah. And the other thing I'll say about Val, which you probably know of, is that I think last year the Agatha Christie estate took exception to Val being called the Queen of Crime by her publishers. Now, as far as I can see, every major mystery murder writer, it's their turn to be the Queen of Crime. Ruth Rendell was the Queen of Crime, and so on. Well, and so they threatened to sue the publisher. They said, we have copyrighted the Queen of Crime, we the Agatha Christie estate. So if you follow her on Instagram, you will notice now that her handle is Quine of Crime. And for those of you who've never heard, the word quine means a woman, a child in Doric, I think in the Doric in Scottish dialect, and a perky one at that. So, on to Sigrid.
It tells you something about Val, that there's so much to say about her, and I'm just going to add one thing briefly, which is that she tried to get her plays published and produced fruitlessly for a while. Then she thought, well, I can write a mystery. But the publisher that took that mystery wasn't a mainstream one, it was the Women's Press. And this was in 1984. We have an early edition from the Women's Press in the archive from 1993. And that, of course, as soon as it was published, it was taken up, and she became an internationally famous writer who's been translated into 40 languages. But if it weren't for the publishers whose books we're trying to rescue, all that would never have happened. So, straight on to number 3, Grant Morrison.
I mean, he was thrilled to be part of this, which is wonderful. But it's difficult to say anything in a nutshell about Grant, because he's so huge. I mean, he's one of the most influential people biggest influences, really, I should think, on British and American comics, along with people like Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman. He transformed the sort of stories that are produced. He's a writer, although he did draw comics when he started off many years ago. And he's recently come out as non-binary, and sort of accepts the they/them pronouns as a kind of badge of honor. He never called him. He never used them himself, but the fans did, and so he thought, fine. And he said, you know, I've known about my sexuality since I was a child, so this is what I'm saying now. And he's a writer, an occultist. He practices magic. He's a humanist. He's quite surreal. And he really changed the face of comics and the storylines. But he's particularly famous for rejigging Batman. But, I mean, he's done so much. He's also originated his own comics. And he's just very recently published a novel, his first novel called Luda, which I've got a copy of it and I've yet to read it. It stars a drag queen who's in a hit panto. I looked at a piece of film about him talking about his book to an American audience. It was interesting watching him explain pantomime to Americans, especially in the current climate. Yeah, panto. Little children go to see it. They always have. It's great. And so it's possibly a murder mystery, and it's going to be something quite different. I'm really looking forward to reading it.
Okay, and number 4 will be familiar to anyone who's seen Rebel Dykes. Della Grace Volcano.
Excuse me. Dell's the only non-Scot, actually. They're American, or American-born, but I've spent, maybe half their life, maybe more, in Europe. At the moment, Dell she's lived in Sweden for quite some time with their partner and 2 kids who identify as non-binary. Sorry, gender neutral. Dell was born intersex, and she was raised as, they were raised as a girl. And now one of the things they call themselves, apart from a mama papa, a ma pa, the kids, is I do apologise, I'm quite old. They refer to themselves as an hermaphrodite, which I think is pretty good. When this Love Bites, this is Dell's first publication, and there are photographs of queer women playing, and it's very sexual, and it grew out of the old scene in the early 1990s, where there were huge dyke discos. Who knew, And these are their friends. That's actually Dell on the cover. The photograph I've worked from is, I think it was a self-portrait with blue beard. And Dell was quite, what can I say? She has a book. They had a book of photographs out called the Drag King book, and Dell themselves went in for a drag competition and failed. I mean, practically one of the only people there who actually had a real beard, and yet they came nowhere. And they said, well, perhaps the sort of drag king, the strip king, leather stripper king, was a bit too much for them all to take, because most people at that time were concerned with realism. And Dell went much more beyond that, and they call themselves part-time gender terrorist. Queer, trans, intersex subjects were always treated as subjects and not objects, which had been the case before them. And in fact, there's this fantastic exhibition just opened in London, which lots of you will know about, called is it Women in Revolt? Women in Revolt. And Dell has some photographs in there, and it's a fantastic exhibition, and they're in London at the moment for the first time in a long time, meeting up with all the old pals. It's been a marvellous thing.
I'd also like to add that when Dell's book Love Bites came out, there were quite a few people in the community who said, none of this gender terrorism for me. And they persuaded Gaze the Word in London not to stock it, but West and Wild Bookshop, which was the successor shop to Lavender Menace, did stock it. And we're proud that we were on Dell's side. So,
a note here I have to say that I think it's important to say that she's always used life, body, and her life and body as a primary source of material and inspiration. And if any of you know her work, you'll understand why that is. She's quite unique. They are quite unique, I think, still.
okay, number 5, Jackie K.
Actually, Jackie really does need no introduction, I think. She was born in 61, and of a Scots mother born in Edinburgh, in fact, and a Nigerian father. And she was adopted by two fantastic people that Diane and I had the privilege to meet, and I think a friend, Vicky, over there, grew up across the road from them in Glasgow. And he worked for the Scottish Communist Party, I think he did it, their newspaper. Her mother was part of CND. There was a solidly working class socialist background. And Red Dust Road, her book Red Dust Road, is a search for her birth parents. And it's also, she feels it's a love letter to her adoptive parents. They were truly wonderful. She famously was in a relationship with Carol Ann Duffy. And they, I think they collaborated on did they not collaborate on a book of love poems to each other, I think? But there's a great joke about that, about not the book, but Carol Ann's poet laureateship, which I'll not tell you now because I'll forget, but ask me later. It was very funny. It's a good joke. One thing that's never in any of the biographies that you can look up online is that, and I do have it in my book, in the 80s and 90s in London, there was a queer theatre company called Gay Sweatshop. And this lasted from the 80s into the 90s. And Jackie was the first black author they commissioned to write a play for them. And she wrote it in 1988, which was the year of Section 28. And it was called Twice Over. And Sweatshop toured around the country with their productions. And apparently in Bristol, a local Tory councillor said it was sinister and subversive. So I'd say job done.
And number 6, Joe Clifford.
Yay!
But wait a minute. What's this?
There.
Here's the real Joe Clifford.
Yeah. So, well...
Queer art makes everything real.
Well, Bob has been Joe's glamorous assistant. I shall say Joe Clifford, playwright, author of over 90 professionally produced plays in every medium, seen all over the world.
Did you ask me you were going to do this?
I did.
And I must have said yes.
You said you'd be delighted.
And I completely forgot. So what a lovely surprise to see that. And it's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank
and
you.
I am so honoured. I'm so honoured to be in this amazing company. Thank you very, very much.
My pleasure, Joe.
Well, I'll read my favorite quote from Joe's play, Eve. Theater belongs to a different time, queer time, open time. That's where the power of this place comes from. And I'd say it's also where the power of queer books comes from. They take you into a different time and a different world. And I'd like to ask the two of you what you think about that, because both of you started your careers as queer artists at a time when it was dangerous sometimes even to come out to someone on your stair. It was perfectly legal to sack a person just for being queer, and street harassment was a constant reality. And now, all these years later, we have the freedom to have a gathering like this and to publish these portraits, and the books, the new books that are for sale here at this book fair and in our archive. And what has it meant to you to be starting your careers in such a difficult climate and gradually for the freedom to open up for you Do you think it's made a difference to your art? And I'm sure it's made a difference to your life.
Oh, well, I had prior knowledge of the question, so I was lucky when I started out as a cartoonist in the early 70s, that the first work I did was actually for queer, well, it was a lesbian magazine called Sappho, and I drew these things and sent them off. They were very bad jokes, but they published them. And so the first things I was doing was actually for the alternative press, and then I went on to gay news and all the rest of it. And of course, these were absolutely separate worlds, my day job and my alternative job. But I was very lucky because I was freelance, I worked at home. I've always worked from a studio at home. And I was in an industry that was actually more accepting. I was in an arts industry, basically, even though it was, the publishing, actually, white-collar, male-dominated industry. But the people I worked with were, by and large, great. We always have to keep coming out, but I didn't have to come out that much because in that world I wasn't really ever in. As it were, and literally sometimes I never even went into the office, you just dropped them off at the desk. But unlike now, when you never go into an office, when it's just all done online. However, I was lucky, I was cushioned against that, most of that kind of homophobia. And then over the years, things have changed so much that I was able to even consider bringing out a big queer history full of pictures of which came out in '91, Sensible Footwear. So things have changed a lot.
Joe, you will have seen so many changes over your career, writing 100 plays, and most recently, Eve, which is about your transition, and the Gospel according to Jesus, Queen of Heaven, which has made people angry all over the world.
Well, I mean, I feel a bit of a fraud, really, because I did not come out as a queer artist. The first play I wrote that was performed was in 1980, and I could not come out. I simply could not come out. It was very difficult for me even to come out to myself. I was so frightened, I was so ashamed, and I kind of, for about 10 years, I made a living as with John Clifford, straight artist. I did pretty well. I was very fashionable for a bit. But in the 90s, I started to write about being trans. And immediately, theatres, all those plays were turned down. Theatres stopped commissioning me. I wasn't enabled to write an original play for about, 15 years or so. It was all adaptations. So that's what happened. And eventually, when I did come out as trans, with a play called God's New Frock, that was about 2002. Well, I had a nervous breakdown. The strain was too much, and at that time I thought I was never going to be able to write again. It took me about 6 months to recover from that, and the next time I came out, in 2009, with the Gospel according to Jesus, Queen of Heaven, the streets outside the theatre, outside the Tron, were full of angry people, or hundreds of angry people. And then in the next few days, there are hundreds and thousands of angry people. And all over the press were accounts of how dreadful, immoral, wicked, rotten, vile I was. And I think, again, in 2009, I was the only openly trans performer, actor there was. I remember having a conversation with a trans actress just before then, and she didn't want to have anything to do with me, nothing to do with me, because for her, the only future was if people didn't understand she was trans. If people thought she was a cis woman, she might have a career, but otherwise nothing. And in those days, well, that was the goal. That was the goal of the treatment we received. It was to enable me to disguise my voice, disguise everything so that nobody would ever know that I was trans. The assumption being that if people did know I was trans, they would hate me. That was treatment in those days. And so, I mean, it's amazing what has happened. And of course, the other thing in those days was that there was no representation. I mean, your beautiful bookshop had nothing about being trans. Nothing at all. You know, it wasn't your fault. It just didn't exist. I was in a bookshop in Manchester on Monday, and there was a whole fucking, excuse me swearing, there was a whole stack of books about being trans. And I went, wow, how things have changed. I mean, it's incredible. And of course, the hostility that is happening at the moment is a response to the fact that we have become visible, we have become powerful, we are changing things. And in a way, it's a compliment. But Queen Jesus says, bless you if people persecute you for being who you are, because it means you are bringing about change. And bless those who persecute you too, for hatred is the only thing they have, and it doesn't amount to much. And they will lose it in the end, for no matter what they say or what they do, they cannot stop the change that is coming. And one day, we will all be free.
Well, I think that's a great place to end and ask if there are any questions from the audience.
I mean, I don't remember. Can I still talk? I don't remember events like this happening. I mean, there was your bookshop. You know, there were these little islands of... But this didn't happen. And if this did happen, it would have been all full of socialist, Marxist books. I mean, there must be a queer section. You haven't had time to look. And if anybody wants copies of Queen Jesus... I've got 5 in my bag.
And we've got 2 copies of Eve on our stall as well.
There is a question from Corey online who asks, would each of you please pick a writer that has shaped your queer journey as a reader? So Kate, you've got a mic. Do you want to go first?
A writer who will...
Who has shaped your queer journey as a reader? And I'll give this back to you, Bob. So you can answer too.
I suppose that's the interesting question. I suppose, anyway, the writer whom you could say has certainly had an impact on my queer journey was when I was a teenager, I discovered the novels of Colette, a French, eminent French writer. What a life she had, bisexual. She wrote about the theatre, she wrote about passionate love stories between men and women, young women, older men, older women and younger men, and things that I'd not really thought about sex or love at all by then. And there's this kind of huge sort of, continental feast of passion and lives are open to me. But the Claudine novels that she wrote, which were probably a bit of soft porn in their day, that a ghastly old husband had encouraged her to write, about these naughty schoolgirls, basically. And my eyes were opened. I thought, I like them very much, and I suppose really that kind of maybe pointed the compass a little bit in the direction to which I've proceeded ever since. That way, dykedom. Yeah, Colette would be my first choice. Bob?
Well, I think the most influential book I read was many, many years ago, called Coming Out by Geoffrey Weeks, which was first published in 1976 by a company called Quartet. And in it, he writes of the recent history of gay liberation, which probably dates from the middle of the 60s, certainly from 69. But he was influential because I was a sociologist, and I eventually got a degree in sociology. But so he was able to speak to me in the sort of language that I understood about how our community was going to develop and how it had already developed even by 1976. In the sense that, and the wider community, which is what we were struggling to survive in, was that the breakdown of authoritarian and conservative societies, although to a certain extent they're coming back again, but in the 60s, in the 70s, that was really what helped us to find our own feet as a community. He talked about pluralism of little groups of people, all with their own identities. So it was an early sort of discussion on identity politics as well. From there, that's really where we've developed and where we've come to now, where it means that there was room for the trans community to be able to develop, which was really, as Joe has just said, really still underground until relatively recently. So, and then he wrote his autobiography, whose the name I've forgotten, something about a son from the valleys or something like that. And there he was writing about his life and how he developed as an academic, but also how he got involved in all sorts of politics, which basically was reinforcing what he had been saying and coming out. I don't think it's in print anymore. It certainly went through a couple of editions, but that's my choice.
It's a good question. I mean, there was nobody. I mean, that was the feature of my life. As I grew up, there was nobody. There was nothing. It was like I didn't exist. And part of my job, I suppose, has been to try to make something happen and be visible. But there was one writer who I fell in love with when I was, really having a very, very hard time when I was 15 or so, was the Spanish poet and playwright Lorca, whose work I totally fell in love with. I didn't understand why. I didn't even know he was gay, because that wasn't common knowledge in those days. But there was something about him that really, really spoke to me. And when I started to write about being trans in the 90s, I wrote a play called The Night Journey. I'll tell you about it because it was lost. It's been lost. I don't know what's happened to it. It was The Night Journey. When I was a nurse, I was working in a hospital in Kirkcaldy in a medical ward, and there were these people, lost people, wandering around in their pajamas. I didn't know who they were. And finally I understood that these people were people who had taken an overdose the night before. And they'd gone to casualty, they'd had their stomachs pumped out, and they were being kept in their pajamas, so they couldn't leave the ward until they'd had half an hour with a psychiatrist. And then they'd be given their clothes back and sent out into the world. And so this play, The Night Journey, was about one of these characters who's tried to kill herself, clearly a trans person like me. And the play is about her journey through hell and her guide through hell. You know, in Dante's Inferno, Dante's guide is a Latin poet, Virgil. Well, this person's guide through hell is Lorca. And Lorca leads her through hell into the daylight of the next morning. And that was my tribute to him and what he did for me.
Well, I could mention a whole lot of names. I didn't have a gang when I was a teenager. They were my gang, but though some of them didn't come to me until I was in my 20s. I've talked about some of them before, such as Ursula Le Guin and Vita Sackville-West, but this time I'd like to mention two of them. One was Christopher Isherwood. He published Frank life story in which he told the truth that he'd had to conceal in his other books that were much more famous, like Goodbye to Berlin. I couldn't afford to buy his book in hardback, so I used to go into Foyles in London when I was a tourist and read 20 pages and then skedaddle before the shop assistants told me to move on. And I read quite a bit of the book that way. He was very irreverent. He always had a laugh, even when some of the things he was talking about were anything but hilarious. He was quiet and gentle, but he never gave in. But the other one I want to mention is one that the other name I want to mention is someone probably nobody here has heard of. He's vanished almost without a trace. His name is Don Teal, and he was involved in gay liberation in New York in the 1970s. He wrote a book called The Gay Liberationists. It was published in a hardback edition. The print was a little bit squint. It was an odd typeface I'd never seen before. The pictures were all black and white, and you had to look hard at them. But it was from him that I found out about the original Lavender Menace in 1970, and it was from him that I found out about the street transvestite action revolutionaries, who there's a film about them that was recently shown by Queer Film Night. They were very active in New York at that time, and they had a whole community of homeless trans people to draw on who supported them. If it hadn't been for a chance encounter with that book in a small town in New Mexico, I wouldn't have known about any of this and wouldn't have decided that things didn't have to be the way they looked as if they were. That's a good one. I am amazed by new queer writers. Part of the archive's mission is to connect the queer writing culture of today with the culture we had in the bookshop. That I think the view of being queer that they put across is completely evolved from the one that we had when we were in our 20s and 30s and started the bookshop. They aren't fenced in by these categories. It's turned into a rainbow. That symbol wasn't chosen by anybody who knew what was going to happen in the future. It's all about looking into yourself and seeing the things that you haven't been able to say, even though it's not illegal or a social disaster to say them anymore. But there are still a lot of disasters along the way, and they're the ones who are braving them and speaking out.
Gosh, that is a good question. I think, I don't know, I mean, for me, writing has always been about survival. If I hadn't been a writer, I'd be dead. You wouldn't know me. And part of a lot of work I do is actually about helping and supporting young queer writers, because I'm so excited that there are any. It's kind of miraculous. I was with a queer group in Perth, which is, you know, I mean, that's extraordinary. That's miraculous. They've got a venue on Perth High Street. And I mean, what amazing creativity and courage and joy in these young people. Oh, it was just lovely, lovely, lovely to see. But the other thing that I'm really keen on doing is being queer in straight places, if that makes any sense. So to perform Queen Jesus in Iona Abbey not so long ago was just amazing, amazing. And on Sunday, I am co-leading a Remembrance Day service, which is about the straightest thing you can imagine, and it'll be, you know, about peace in Augustine United Church, George IV Bridge. And then in the beginning of December, I shall be in Manchester Cathedral, something called A Very Queer Christmas. I mean, can you imagine a very queer Christmas happening in a cathedral? I mean, look what you've done, you guys. It's just, it's amazing. And just to keep on doing that, because the whole world needs to be queer. There's no doubt about it. You look at the carnage that's happening in the world, it's the work of straight men trying to express their masculinity. This is intolerable. This is going to destroy us all. We have to resist. And we resist not through bloody shooting people, but through being ourselves. And being ourselves wherever we are, including in this little space here, makes a huge, huge difference to the world. Because everything is connected.
Well, yes, you've both taken words out of my mouth. And what I'd like to say about queer writing is related to the way that politics is developing in the United States. And very slowly, there used to be a phrase when America sneezes, we catch a cold. And unless and until we resist through and support queer writers, that's what the question was, but also support our own communities in an open and honest and forthright way, that will be our resistance to be able to express ourselves and articulate who we are to the rest of the world, I think. And queer writers will help us do that. Queer writers have the imagination, they have the time, they have the you know, the idea of imagination is so powerful in really dark times that it's important to support them.
Well, I mean, I have to agree with absolutely everything that's been said. I think, I mean, I do words and pictures, and I think that's a particularly powerful medium, and a sort of gay life and gay sensibility, a queer life, queer sensibility. It's a different viewpoint. They're different pictures, and pictures and words together make a huge impact. It's more than a page full of text. It's a different thing altogether. It's so powerful. And I think to produce those images, going further on, into the future, the present, it's an enormous reflection on life to other people, but also backwards, as in the past. The stuff that we used to do in the olden days, it's an important archive, historical archive of how times, or a slice of how times were. Sorry, I'm garbling this a little bit, but what I'm trying to say is that the work we do is important for the people who come after us, to know that we existed. And the work that is happening now, the writers, the artists, it's exactly the same thing. We're a presence, and I say this every time I do an event, is that we cannot become complacent. I think everybody who thought otherwise now knows that, well, one would hope, that the world is swinging to the right in a big way, and we do what we have to do because we have to say who we are, because we cannot help doing that, because we need to. And I'm sure most heterosexual other writers do the same thing, but we are always the first target, usually, because we're in every race, every creed, every culture, we're there. And so we're an easy target. And as I say, the world is swinging to the right in ridiculous ways. We were in Bologna, my partner and I were in Bologna a couple of months ago, and Linda in the audience also. No, you weren't actually. You were? Yeah, sorry, brain. And there's fantastic various voices, choir fest, queer choirs. And during the pandemic, our choir, Loud and Proud, had done a three-way Zoom. It was before the pandemic, with a German choir and a Ukrainian choir and us, and we all learnt a song from each country. And in Bologna, we were able to meet the Ukrainian choir. Some people who'd escaped, who'd given up their lives, some of the people in the choir had disappeared. And so it was a beautiful sing, and it was very emotional. And apparently, one young queer person, an Italian in another choir, said to one of the women leaders of the choir about the war, "Oh, but it wasn't real, though. It's not real, though, is it? It's not real." And she was shocked. We were shocked. And people don't get it. They think it's fake news. They probably think we're fake news. So we have to write and draw and keep on, because it's what we do and it's what we need to do. With joy.
Thank you all very much. I'd like to encourage you to resist and buy books. And this space is one of the most amazing I've ever been in. You can keep it open by doing what you know you want to do. And our stall is on the right-hand side over here. We'll have Kate's cards. We're going to get them out there as fast as we can. And we'll also have 2 of Joe's plays.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to head straight to... I'll take that.
Thanks,
to the Lavender Menace stall, and
Yes.
then people can find you there.
Okay, that's great. That's what we'll do.